Edge and Space International, both based in LA. Ante's installations and sculptures explore issues of function and dysfunction in our built and hypothesized environments. He's recently exhibited at the Museum of Contemporary Canadian Art, the Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in Denmark, the EV&A in Ireland, and SF MoMA. His work has been widely published and is included in the permanent collections of SF MoMA, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Art Gallery of Ontario. Ante has been the recipient of numerous research and creation grants, including the Grant Foundation for Advanced Studies, the Canada Council for the Arts. In 2008, Ante was the recipient of the International Artist Residency in Berlin, awarded by the Canada Council for the Arts. And in 2007, he received the Emerging Voices Award from the Architectural League of New York. His work has been published in Metropolis, Frame, Praxis, Thresholds, Azure, Art Paper, Surface, Canadian Art, Art in America, BE, Canadian Architect in the Journal of Architectural Education. The monograph catalog Te Liu Matter was published by the Künstlerhaus Bethanian in 2009. In terms of architects who wear many hats, designers, program directors, installation artists, curators, etc. I think it's an interesting coincidence that this lecture follows Ciro Najli's from just last Friday. It's almost as if we actually planned a hypothetical conversation between them, but those of you who know us well know that that would be impossible for us to do, and so it's just a complete accident. But it's a happy accident that there's a kind of maybe discussion from Friday to Monday, so that in a way where Ciro's work begins from giving primary articulation to architecture as a structural and material practice, Ante's begins with the premise of architecture as first and foremost a cultural and popularly programmatic discipline, or as a conditioning project, conditioning both in a sense specifically in the case of air and the environment, but also conditioning in terms of social and behavioral issues. So if you take their, again, coincidence maybe, or their two suspended cloud projects, Ante's Cloud from the 2008 Venice Biennale, and the project that Ciro showed, Cumulus, from this year. You can see the difference between Ciro's intricate craft on the one hand and Ante's found and assisted ready-mades. And in a certain sense, I think maybe the discussion restates one that we've talked about a lot here, which is the distinction Alejandro Zarapola makes between control architects and power architects. And in some sense, the distinction maybe between an investment in procedural protocols, geometric in the case of Ciro, or what is called a control architect, versus the effects and reception strategy in terms of Ante's graphic and found project, which I would consider to be a power architect. In Ante's series of projects, starting with Airborne Exchange, Cloud, and this year's Whiteboard, all basically white monochrome swarms of domestic appliances and gizmos, or even his green monochrome house, his Title D project, the big Monopoly house. There's a kind of situation of Corbusier meeting Brenner Bam. And I think that there's, you can also see a kind of great affinity with several of the directions that we're working on here in terms of those popular cultural and graphic projects. So please join me in welcoming back one of our folk soloists, Te Liu.
Thank you very much, Bob, and maybe you can give my lecture for me. Actually, it's also pretty good. I'm happy to be back here and be a folk solo. I've been asked to err on the side of brevity, so I will attempt to stick with that this evening. Yeah, I had a great interview earlier with the Fresh Meat people, and I feel like I wish I could give the interview back. He asked the questions. I'll show this first slide. They asked me how I became the person that I am doing the work that I do, and I just like explained being slightly a field architect in a way. But I also said that I, in a way, after practicing for a few years after graduating from in SciArc, I kind of missed being in school, and I wanted to behave like a student again, and sort of tackle the kind of problems in a certain way that really the academy is a haven for conceptually oriented work, coming up with strange problems to address and materially sort of manifesting some kind of response to those problems, which in my case I think are inherently social and cultural at the base. I'll show this slide. If I can get through this slide, then I maybe don't have to say anything for the rest of the lecture. These are just some interests that I sort of threw down. The every other day comes from actually an interview that we were giving back when I was practicing architecture. We were being interviewed by Index magazine, and the interviewer said, "All right, would you say that you're interested in the everyday?" And it's true, we were interested in everyday life and everyday things, and the beauty contained therein. But then my partner said, "Well, we are, but why don't you say we're into the every other day instead?" I said, "Yeah, that sounds pretty good, I think." Related, but slightly different. Bad translations, I'm into happy accidents as well. Bad translations for me kind of have to do with a sometimes deliberate or casual misreading or misinterpretation of objects and their associations and their context. I think great things happen when you misread things, and sometimes something latent in an object sort of comes to the fore by looking at it sort of in the wrong way, or not quite understanding something about it, or distorting it in some way. The Normal and the Pathological is actually the title of a book by George Canguilhem, where he talks a lot about sort of health and disease, actually, but he talks about them in a really interesting way, where one is not the opposite of the other. They're not opposed conditions, but they are. He says that disease or the healthy body is actually one that is capable of falling sick and then recovering, and so you kind of have to have simultaneously both conditions written into each other. That these terms don't mean anything without sort of almost the simultaneous coexistence of the other. And so for me, that also has to do with like the ugly and the beautiful, the normal and the abnormal, the clean and the dirty, so on and so forth. And then in general, I'm just kind of interested in things. I'm interested in objects. I'm interested in what they're called. I'm interested in what they look like, what they do, what they're supposed to do, why we consume them, why the kind of hopes and desires that are embedded in them as tools or as things that we use and desire. Before I started doing any of my installation work, I kind of sat around and had time to make things that were not asked of me to do, because I had a full-time teaching job for a year, so I do that kind of thing. I started collecting disused computers that were about to be thrown out, and I photographed them and started making these collages. So you can see what vintage these are, probably recognizing some Macintosh computers from the late 90s. And I just kind of recomposed them into these machines that looked familiar but sort of had slightly unknown uses. And just wondering what these things sort of could be for, but they're sort of kind of new and obsolete at the same time. At the time, I was also interested in, everyone shows this image, but this is the famous image by Dallin Gray from Rainer Bannon's essay, "A House is Not a Home," and sort of ruminating on sort of like the increasingly sophisticated nature of our sort of domestic appliances and how that sort of figures for the future of architecture. Whether we really needed architecture at all, because we would have such incredible control over our environments that we might not need the envelope anymore. I mean, this was a very rhetorical gesture, of course. At the time, I also was able to get my first solo exhibition at the Contemporary Art Gallery in Vancouver, and it kind of started off in bit of a personal way, because I'm just interested in these cycles of things that we go through. But you see on the right hand side there is it's actually a binary air purifier, and I was saying during my interview, it's like I started by actually just finding one of these in a thrift store and recognizing it as something that I actually owned 10 years prior when I was an undergrad at University of Toronto, and I had one and my roommate had one, and we used to just like run this thing full blast because we were smoking too much in our room, and we were afraid that our parents would show up and catch us during an unexpected visit. And so, but we sort of loved having these air purifiers around. And I mean, they're kind of like attractive, and they seemed, to perform an important role. But of course, by then, I had been to architecture school, and or when I refound the object, I'd been in architecture school, and I started thinking about the kind of the sort of rhetorics of pertaining to hygiene that accompanied the early modernist project. And this was used by Corbusier, Neutra, and others, and it was sort of written into sort of advent of high modernist architecture, that this architecture would help us have cleaner, healthier, better organized, less cluttered cities and homes. But at the time I'm tackling this project, I was thinking about, hygiene, say, as a discourse in the 1920s, but then also in the contemporary context as well. Noticing that everyone had sort of, recently become really crazy about hygiene in a very different way, not sort of as a part of a kind of almost utopian project, but in a very sort of kind of basic, almost frightened sort of way. Antibacterial soaps, oxygen assistance, all of these things, people not letting their kids play in dirt, but then also the positive, negative, consequences of this kind of, sort of renewed interest in hygiene and cleanliness and fear of disease and germs. I was also very interested in this movie by Todd Haynes, an early movie of his called Safe, early role with Julianne Moore. Is that right? When she plays this housewife living in an affluent suburb who develops environmental illness, and then it's a very sad and dramatic movie where she basically has to kind of end up checking out of her life and living the rest of the days in this igloo with an oxygen tank. So for this is Airborne that Bob referred to. So Airborne, I started collecting all of these machines, which to me, of course, were sort of, in a way, stand-ins for these moments in the sort of history of modernist architecture. These are all machines that work on air purifiers, humidifiers, ionizers, and they're all, in this case, they're all working as well. And that's the array there. So for this installation, I had the gallery sort of sealed off, like you can see at the end there, and so these are all kind of like sort of whirring and making noise, and really kind of walk in, and so they kind of operate at a one-to-one scale as this collection of sort of domestic appliances, but also as a model or a series of models for certain types of urban proposals. This was followed by Exchange. This was at the Henry Urbach Architecture Gallery in New York. Here, this is kind of operating at a one-to-one level, and here, this kind of idea of like what these things are functioning for, like gets really pushed to an extreme in a way. These are 56 high HEPA air purifying machines from Honeywell that were sort of constructed into these totemic columns, creating this space. that you kind of had to sort of wander through. It's sort of, you know, a bit of a kind of a screwed up hypostyle room. And in this case, it's also working on making the purity of the white cube gallery space even purer as well. So I've got these things are taking all of the air inside the gallery, sucking it in and sterilizing it and blowing it back out every 40 seconds or so. To the extent where you don't really recognize that the space seems very weird in a way because it is so incredibly clean and there's no scent. Well, there actually is the scent, and it's actually the scent of no scent, which in oddly is very peculiar as well. Like not to have bodily smells and smells of all materials which we kind of take for granted as experiencing all the time. A series of sort of smaller pieces, which I call complex. There on the floor, sort of smaller versions of Airborne. At the same time, I was also making wallpaper, and this is called Pattern. It's called the Pattern Language series, that inspired by Christopher Alexander, but in a different way. And these wallpapers, these are the first ones that I made. Originated from taking aerial photographs of suburbs, some of them famous, most notably Levittown, and restitching them back together, to form these patterns, which then became wallpaper. This is actually a later version of the Levittown wallpaper, which is in the Art Institute here in Chicago. So for me, it was kind of taking an image of a kind of iconic suburb, these houses that were mass-produced, and taking that the sort of serial repetition of these houses and streets, and kind of replicating the logic and then sort of pushing it quite far until it became like a very sort of distorted and even a kind of psychedelic representation. Probably thinking that I was collapsing the normal and the pathological here in this work, this installation in Berlin. This is another piece from the Complex series. This one was weird. What am I trying to do? This one had a reflecting pool because a lot of great projects have reflecting pools, right? Especially good buildings in the 1950s. This one, I think I was trying to make some weird comment about architecture, control, and repression somehow, because this one had. These are male and female synthetic pheromones that I got. And so really what's happening here is that there are actually pheromones being distributed in the reflecting pool and shaken with vibrators that you can't see underneath the platform. But the intention was to make this kind of slightly absurd sort of Duchampian machine, that produced desire, but then sort of sucked it all in and sterilized it, simultaneously. So this stuff is sort of emanating out and then being sucked in. Of course, nobody really could figure out that's what was going on because it was invisible. This is the Cloud project from 2008, commissioned for the Venice Architecture Biennale. This is a view of it in the Arsenale. And at this point, the machines have conspired and just decided to leave and scope out new territory. I did this while I was in residency in Berlin, so it was kind of provided a new opportunity to sort of access a whole new host of machines. Most of them are German, although a lot of them come from China, Italy, France, all over the place. So I saw this, part of it was inspired by the space, because it's such a, the Arsenal is such an amazingly huge and long space, and I sort of thought of this as both a kind of like a floating city in a way, but also some kind of, armada you know, traveling through the space. And most of these are working as well. It's really hard to get these machines in Germany because people don't throw stuff out very much in Germany because the stuff seems to be so well made that you keep it forever. So I ended up like raiding German eBay for like about 3 months trying to find all this stuff. And then the prices kept getting higher and higher because I think they started catching on to the fact that some freak was buying every used air purifier in the country. It can be prohibitively expensive. So this ends up being my inventory of machines that I ended up with that constitute cloud. I think there's about 150 machines of different kinds. All invented to work on the air in different ways. And so this was a statement for cloud. Good hygiene is important. Cloud is comprised of domestic air purification appliances produced and consumed around the world. In the early 20th century, ideas about cleanliness and healthy living were influential in the development of modern architecture and urbanism. They were connected to the call for sunlight, greenery, fresh air, and spacious expanses free of congestion. Rhetorics of hygiene would resonate psychologically and translate visually in the creation of new, pure forms. This is a later installation of cloud in Ireland, in Limerick. Here there's a mezzanine, so you can get up sort of to eye level on these things. And then this is the installation, I think, of a full array again back in Toronto at the Museum of Canadian Contemporary Art. And then here's a view of it at SF MoMA from last year. So at the time that I was resident in Berlin, I also had to do an exhibition in Berlin, sort of simultaneous to the time I was working on cloud, and I was, very much still interested in pursuing these ideas related to our airspace. This is called Matter. So this ended up being a 2-channel projection piece. And so you walk into the gallery and you see these 2 sort of 4-meter projections. And you're looking at what looks like something astronomical, something interstellar. But these images are actually being produced by a live feed in the space, in another corner of the gallery. And so what it basically is a slide projector and a pretty sensitive surveillance camera, sort of aimed up at the beam. And that's it. And then this is in turn feeding the projectors. And so basically what it is just the crap in the air in the gallery, actually, that is being transmitted. One feed is live, and then the other is being broadcast at half speed. And so they both started at the same time at the opening of the exhibition. These are some stills. And then, I guess it's interactive in a way because the more people in the gallery, the more stuff, gets sort of pushed around the room. And so it's almost, you could almost see it reacting as people came in. But then when people caught on, they tried to trample up more dirt, so they could get more stuff going on. And so by the end of once you get into, the cycle of the exhibition, what you're seeing on the second screen, the one that's on delay, becomes a sort of a historical record of what was happening in the room a certain amount of time ago. So after 2 weeks, you're seeing on the other screen what was happening a week ago. And for me, that was kind of interesting. The hidden life of germs, and dust in the room. But also because it looked astronomical, it seemed appropriate as well because of the delay that we have as well, looking at the sky. The light that we're seeing from stars is also delayed by several million years, I think, in some cases. I was also working on another exhibition at the time I was in Berlin. This is a pack of flat pack furniture that you assemble yourself. I think this is from Ikea. And I had been interested in working with this kind of stuff before because it's, I have this love-hate relationship with it. I think a lot of us do. My life is almost Ikea-free now, I would say, which is great. These are, like you get this stuff and it's so alluring and it's so cheap and you get sort of instant stuff, for nothing. But then you always sort of feel a little bit dismayed with it after a while because it falls apart really easily and you kind of wish that you actually didn't have to buy this stuff in the first place, right? So these are, I call dados, and these are made by taking, that little square coffee table that only costs $15, and it comes in different colors, and the colors change every year. So I would just keep buying these tables, and they have an amazing paint job. Actually, the finish is very, very nice. Except the legs always, they just screw in the bottom, and then you see them in people's houses, and the legs kind of like go out of line, and then they get dented very easily. I just thought, well, these things are so amazing, but they're terrible tables in the end. So I just took them and I just started slicing them on the table saw, and then I just kind of glued them back together, and I sort of thought they would be better as sort of non-functioning entities, and this is what I came up with those tables. And then while I was in Berlin, I was just thinking, about using these again, and just kind of like go buy the stuff and sort of sit in the studio and kind of try to misassemble them in a way. But I was thinking at the time, this was for an exhibition I had in Toronto, and it was called Style and Epoch, and that title comes from a book written by Ginsberg, where he reflected on sort of cycles of innovation and obsolescence in design and architecture. And I was thinking about the Bauhaus actually, and I was thinking about mass production and the kind of hope that they and others had, the hope they had that rested on mechanized production and distribution and the sort of emancipation of good design and making it available to everyone. And I was thinking in a funny way that things like Ikea and a lot of the stuff that we have recourse to now, in a funny way, sort of represent the fulfillment of that dream. But then this is what we kind of ended up with, right? So I was trying to sort of kind of collapse, as with I think Airborne, sort of a contemporary condition of this stuff and some kind of genesis of it, which I saw as coming from the 20s and the 30s. And I was kind of like sort of returning some of the ambitions of this, to early modern roots in this series of sculptures that I made, which were then photographed. This one actually is taking all of the pieces from 2 pieces of furniture and recreating the Bauhaus in Dessau. It's not easy. Okay, how am I doing on time? Okay, so this is the Leona Drive project. I'm now starting with 1956 bungalows. Similar, but the same vintage as Levittown actually, but this is a suburb, this is one of the oldest suburbs in Canada. And these houses were built for people returning from the war and starting families. I got a call from a curator, Michael Procopo, saying that they had this interesting project where a developer had bought 6 of these houses in a row and planned to demolish them and rezone and build sort of denser monster homes, you know, on the same properties, like really mature lot, good trees. But nobody kind of wanted to, you know, live in these houses anymore. Actually, there's a whole neighborhood of them, and some people have been actually living there since 1956. But these houses don't have very good resale value right now. They're just not desirable, you know, market-wise. And so somehow the curators got permission from the developer to sort of have a temporary sort of exhibition using these houses. And they told me I could have any house I wanted. No, actually they didn't. They said I could have my own house, like the whole thing, whereas, you know, other artists were in charge of working in and around or in a specific room of these houses, but I was given the whole one. And this is the house. And I hadn't visited yet, but they said, well, there's a picture of it on our website, and this is the house that you get. And this house had been abandoned for about a year and was kind of boarded up and not in very good condition. This was in 2009, I think, when I received the call, maybe March or April of 2009. And I mean, what was happening then, as we might remember, was the global financial meltdown, right? In large part fueled by the subprime mortgage crisis. It wasn't as severe, actually, in Canada, because we have different banking laws. But I was thinking very much about this at the time, and I was thinking just about, the house, its multiple realities, the fact that it was going to be demolished, the fact that it wasn't worth anything anymore the way it was, and it had to be kind of sort of, reconstituted in some way to make it viable. And then I was just thinking about another reality of the house, is that the house is it's something you live in on the one hand, but the reason you can live in it is because it's also a promise to pay a debt as well, and that's what a mortgage is, basically. And then the fact that these mortgages have become so complicated, right, and repackaged and then spread out as resold debt in different weird ways all around the world, and this is what in part sort of created the financial crisis that we're going through. So I was thinking about the realities of real estate as well, and banking, which led me to think about monopoly. I mean, to be truthful, when I saw the picture of the house, I kind of thought, it kind of looks a bit like a monopoly. And then I started collecting monopoly houses just to make sure. And so I set out to transform this house accordingly. So this was a study. This was another study. So this is a replica of the house that I cast. Well, is it cast? It's I made a mold for it, and then this model of the house, 19 Leona Drive, was casting household caulking. So this is like solid caulk thing. Monopoly houses come in different shades of green throughout time, so I had to choose one. And so basically spent 2 months just stripping down the house. So I decided to go over there. It's about half an hour drive from where I live, and bringing some students with me and sort of just stripping it down. Basically a very large prep job. So when you go to, paint something, you sand and you patch, and you sand and you patch, and you sand and you patch, right? So that's what we were doing on this house. So we took off the eaves troughs, the railings, the gas meters, some additions to the back side of it, filled in gaps. And then this is the primer coat. So at this point it looked pretty kind of gray. It looked like toothpaste. I kind of want to leave it there, but that wasn't sort of like the goal. So this is the process. I didn't mask off the ground. Just overspray. And then this is a compilation of the painting process, which really just kind of happened over a few days. And that's how it ended up. to this high-rise across the street to take this. And then the exhibition happened over 2 weeks. This is like the dog of a student of mine that showed up. I really wanted to get this dog to stand sideways in front of the house because it sort of looks like one of the playing pieces for, you know, is it a terrier or what is it, right? But the dog wouldn't do that. So this is the best picture I could get. But then this deer showed up, and I couldn't get him to stand sideways because the deer was dead and stuff. So this actually was like another artist was thinking of using this in her installation and then decided to scrap it, and so I followed it for a while before it went away. And then another dog attacked me here. And then a couple months later, this is what happened, and it was destroyed very, very suddenly, and the developer went ahead with it. And so now, like, instead of those 6 houses, I think there's 10 of these, and I think these things sold for about 1.2 million each. And I mean, they're okay, they're not that great. But I got to visit one last time before that happened, and I pried the numbers off, so that's all that's left of the house. So that's my souvenir from the project. Moving to smaller scale work. Actually, to contextualize this, anyway, these are aprons that I made. How about that? So, I've done work that has detoured language and logos. I've made logos out of some Heideggerian phrases. It would take a long time for me to explain why, but I was asked to do a project for an exhibition, and that was clothing related. So I'd always wanted to make clothing. So I took 3 of my favorite philosophers and then tried to find ways of logoizing them. So, and also I wanted these aprons for myself for working in the wood shop as well. So Deleuze from DeWalt, Rancière from Ranger, the tool distribution company, and Agamben, Giorgio Agamben, the Italian philosopher from Ambien, the American. We can't get Ambien in Canada, so the American sleep medicine. Some other text-related work. I was asked to do a project for Nuit Blanche a couple of years ago. Except it was a Nuit Blanche is the all-night art festival that happens once a year. This show that I was in was actually an off-site show, so it wasn't a part of the official program of Nuit Blanche. So like hundreds of thousands of people come out, you know, all night. It's sort of like Halloween now. Ostensibly it's still look at art, but really it's kind of more or less a chance to party all night long and just stay out and make merry. I've never been a fan of Nuit Blanche because I don't think you should just, you know, go out and look at art once a year. So for this, I made a sort of a pun or play on the word, or the phrase Nuit Blanche, which is the term which means all-nighter, it means like white night, and turned it into ennui blanc, which is white boredom instead. And so this sign just sort of sat out all night long and flashed very slowly. This is the studio version of it. Other text work that I've done in the past were these airport runway signs that I made. This was the first one that I made quite some time ago. I mean, this kind of just stemmed from an interest in you know, these, you know, the kinds of signs that we see and the kind of codes contained in them. And I had always loved just rolling around in an airplane, like late at night taxiing and just like looking at this field of these signs and just kind of imagining that they could start to speak somehow. Really, they're there to tell the pilot, you know, how to find the runway or the taxiway. And so more recently, I did another series based on the Freudian triumvirate of the ego and superego. Back to the machines. In 2011, I was asked to do a project, an installation for a solo show in Toronto. At this point, I wanted to kind of expand, you know, beyond the air-related machines, and I was just thinking more about sort of the cycles of consumption and obsolescence that our possessions go through. So I set out to make this work called Blast, and this is it. The basic inspiration for this was the last scene of Zabriskie Point by Antonioni. Has anyone seen that? Like where this house explodes, and in slow motion for about 5 minutes, you just see everything from the house just fly by in super, super slow motion. Wow. Pink Floyd, is that the music? I can't remember. Well, this Pink Floyd song is like blares in the background. So this is Blast. So I saw it either as an implosion or an explosion, probably an explosion of all this stuff. So now there is a lot of different things in here. At the top center is an iconic Braun food processor juicer that you might recognize. But there are other things in here that might seem familiar. In the middle is the first Nintendo. Ice crusher, soda dispenser, basically plastic stuff. Photo printers, fans, things that I could not identify. It ends with a Black & Decker dustbuster. It's kind of appropriate, I think. Super iconic, but super useless as an appliance. It doesn't pick anything up actually. Last year I got asked to do a project for an exhibition called Hyperspaces, and this is at Oakville Galleries. This is a city outside of Toronto. When I visited the gallery, I was really interested in how high the gallery was. It was kind of like a black box. And what I started doing was just poking around. You see these baffles sort of higher up, and I just went up on ladders and looked behind the baffles, and that's where they sort of hid all their HVAC for the building. And I was originally going to do a project where I was going to try to get people up into that zone and do an intervention in there, but that turned out not to work because it was just quite frankly too small. So for this project, I decided to do a project that would be to create this kind of endless, illusory space above the viewer, and with this idea of somehow sort of bringing this sort of hidden world of HVAC to the fore. And so you walk in and you see the suspended cube here, and the Miste bed, and then you sit down, and then you look up, and then when you look up, this is what you see. So it's really only an 8 by 8 foot cube, I think. Maybe it's only 7. But it's an infinite network. There's 2 ducts that I had made and put in here, and it's like a fully interior lined mirrored cube with a piece of two-way glass on the bottom, so you can look up and it's still internally reflecting. This piece is called Fantasia in 24 gauge. Fantasia being a kind of musical composition, which is like a whim or a caprice or fantasy, and 24 gauge referring simply to the gauge of metal that the brass and the sheet metal that the ducts were made out of. I wrote a lot of grant proposals for this and got all of them, but I didn't know what the title was going to be, and the title, awfully enough, for my grant proposals was Disco Duct, or Adventures in Each Track, which I cannot stay with, of course. This is a work on paper called Agenda, and this is basically a transcription. This is what my agenda looked like. This is like a week of appointments for me, and this was in an older piece of software. I use iCal now, but basically had been using this for several years. So this is kind of like what I do every week. It's kind of sad in a way. But then I decided to transcribe them. one day, which then took a long time to do. So I was able to go through 10 years of my appointment calendar, basically, and try to make sense of all this stuff. And then kind of like realizing that, so I took everything that was an appointment and just turned it black and redrew it and changed the proportions a little bit. And it did end up like being this kind of sort of scrambled out Chinese calligraphy in the end. And I really sort of enjoyed, you know, looking at this afterward. It's like this kind of graphic depiction of time spent, work performed, parties, everything. Anything that was written down. So it's kind of, you know, obviously a personal project. This is 2 years. This is 2007, next to 2008. 2008 is empty, like I didn't do anything that year. But it's because I was on sabbatical, and I was in Berlin, and in Berlin nobody writes anything down because everyone says they're an artist and no one has a job, and you just stay up all night and you just go to the studio and make stuff the next day. You can drag yourself out of bed. So that's what happened to me that year. Except for like the couple of sort of dense blotches there, and those are the 4 weeks that I was back in Toronto. And that's what happened to me there. This is just like another quick project. I was asked to do an edition for the Art Gallery of Ontario's sort of annual fundraiser. And the theme of the fundraiser was "The future of art is ... And I kind of took that theme seriously, so I went to the library, I actually went to a library, and looked up books that contained the future of art in the title, and I found a book called On the Future of Art. And there was a great essay in it by Herbert Marcuse called Art as a Form of Reality. So I decided to make a remaster with one sentence from this great essay by Marcuse. And then, this is where it gets really on architecture at this point. It's okay, you know, like, how do I illustrate this Marcuse passage, which I like very much? And then how do I help this art gallery sell this thing so that I can help them raise money? So of course I chose cute animals. So I'll just let you read this passage, which I actually believe in quite a lot. That's a pretty famous picture. Pretty much trolls the internet for cute animal pictures. Okay, so last project. This was the preparatory sketch for Whiteboard. So the first time I met, well, at the time that I was doing Blast, I had these great assistants and we worked really hard on this thing. And as soon as we finished Blast, I said, we should do this project in reverse someday. Like, what if everything just kind of collapsed? And then luckily, a year later, I got a chance to do a project, again for Nuit Blanche, but this one in a much more, this was part of the official program. And the show was called Museum for the End of the World, and it took place at City Hall in Toronto, in the underground parking garage. And they asked me for a piece for that, and so I thought it was a great opportunity to do the sort of imploded, the truly imploded version of Blast. And maybe this represents the ultimate death of the machines for me, because I did see this piece ultimately as a sort of a final resting spot for a lot of this stuff. And so here is the stuff. The repertoire is getting larger and stranger in this one. This one has intentionally a lot of obsolete technologies. Some recent, some less so. Polaroids. This one, nothing would be functioning because everything is truly dead at this point, so there was like about a month spent collecting all the stuff and gutting it, which was incredibly enjoyable to do. All the insides. Part of the collection. The last one's a coffee maker, actually. A lot of it was personal as well. I wanted to find things that I had owned. My first computer was a Mac Classic from 1987. And actually finding this was pretty hard. I ended up having to sort of get it on auction because you don't see these sort of lying around anymore. This was a computer, none of you are old enough probably, that in 1987 cost more than a year's tuition when I was in school. It had 500K of memory in it. And the screen was about this big and had less pixels on it than an iPhone does now. And it was basically, it's basically like a $2,000 word processor, right? At the time, it couldn't do much else, but it was pretty cool at the time. And it weighs about 17 pounds. This is the inside of a Sony alarm clock. It's great looking inside and seeing the different ways that things are. The Sony stuff was made really, really, well. I had a ball spun out of aluminum. Dummy didn't make it into the piece. But here's the process of collecting another dustbuster, paper shredder, and in the middle a George Foreman grill. So I was also going for sort of iconic things, things that were like really sort of faddish and consumed with great zeal at one point in our recent past. Lower centers is I can't remember, it's a zip drive. Remember the zip drives, which kind of came after SideQuest drives? That was revolutionary because it had 100 megabytes of storage on it, right? Which at that time was bigger than my hard drive in my Mac a couple of years later. The original US Robotics 56K fax modem. So anyways, it goes on and on and on. It was kind of an amazing experience collecting all this stuff. Really kind of sort of troublesome and nostalgic and fun in different ways. Just reflecting on this kind of incredible array of stuff and the array of things that we go through, as users, and reflecting on the lifespan of these things, how we use them, how they become completely foreign to us, sometimes rather quickly now, how a lot of these objects will never exist again. Even holding a telephone, how often do you use a regular telephone now? A lot of this stuff has been replaced by the smartphone, so we tend not to use alarm clocks, we tend not to need clocks, and conventional phones. And then, taking this stuff apart as well, you realize that, things could have been a lot smaller before because, most of these things are, for the most part, quite empty. But it's just that for what they do, we just needed the interface so that there was enough buttons on the outside that you could actually sort of, control the thing. But really, all the intelligence of the thing is often, on a very small circuit board. So really, it was just like, the shell of the thing is there to accommodate our fingers, and that's another reason why so much has been, replaced by the smartphone now, because you can control everything from one screen. So physically, you don't need very much space. So I'm just showing process pictures. Here's another Nintendo. There's 3 generations of Nintendo and 3 PlayStations in this. This is the inside of it, and yeah, about 1,200 screws. Actually, nobody throws out a Hello Kitty, but I wanted a Hello Kitty in it, so I had to buy that. Yeah. So here's more process. Almost getting to the end. A sphere has so much surface on it. So I tried to calculate at the beginning how much surface and how many things I would need, and I kept having to get more and more and more. So this is called White Dwarf. Did I mention that? No. White dwarf is the name given to dying stars. You know, once they've sort of spent their fuel and it can't sort of sustain its shape anymore, there's a kind of a gravitational collapse, and everything gets sucked into something very, very densely packed, almost impossibly so. I did know that this was going to look like the Death Star, but then I kind of had to fight it as well. VCRs. There's a beta in here as well. And then it did, I don't have footage of it, but it does spin as well, like a disco ball. And then these are just some pictures from Flickr that I found. You kind of don't even have to photograph your own work anymore. Let people do it for you. So that's the final installation of White Dwarf, and we launched a couple months ago. So, okay, I think that's it. All the projects that I wanted to show. Thank you for coming and sitting through all this.
I mean, like, it's obvious why, like, in one way, why are they the same color? Like,
for the earlier work, it was white because of purism and the relationship to early modern architecture, and most notably the Wissenhofsiedlungen and that era of work. In this latest piece, it's white. Well, it had to be white because it was called White Dwarf, but I kind of wanted to sort of reduce everything just to its kind of purest, sort of most basic form. And that's kind of a way of sort of testing whether you could sort of recognize the stuff. Like once all the logos are gone, once like sort of other sort of specific attributes of the thing, different colors, different textures are gone. What it looks like at that point. Sort of, I mean, I like looking at things and kind of like wondering what they are as well, and sort of being able to recognize them based on sort of fewer clues. Also, because these ones that are all dyed, hypothetically, that's like what happens. You fade, So these are kind of like sort of bleached out and faded. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, you mentioned at the beginning, I think more than once, the idea of leaving architecture and going into art. Is that something that you consciously did, like that a move that you wanted to do, or is it something that like towards the end you started realizing at some point that you're moving away from it, or was it a way of describing yourself to others that was easier to do? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, in my interview with the editors of Fresh Meat earlier, I mean, I talked about it as wanting to engage in work that was more like what I was working on in thesis. Quite frankly, when I was a graduate student at SciArc, and often that involves sort of making up your own problems in a way and addressing them through material or however. So I didn't consciously leave architecture, although I think at a certain point I might have figured that a certain kind of commercial practice wasn't sort of good for me.
But you felt like you have kind of freedom in the work you do, representing, because so much of the work does have where you talk about it links back, and architecture disagree and devices, but does it give you a freedom in terms of being able to present if you work in a gallery space when you approach it as an artist, as opposed to saying I'm an architect working it through? They just needing it something different.
Well, it's fundamentally different because you don't have a client the same way, right? And so a lot of the work is commissioned by curators that I work with, but for the most part, they don't. Whatever you propose is fine, right? Do whatever you kind of want. After you've built up a certain body of work, they're probably expecting some kind of work from you because they know other work that you've done. But it is kind of open in a way that way, which I'm okay with. Yeah.
What kind of issues, not issues, but what's the question you're trying to get at with this work? Like specifically, I mean, I get the whole air hygiene issue, but what questions can you answer with this? You can't really understand the client and you can do one. What is the kind of motivator?
A lot of it is observational, I would say, and the kind of like the re-representing and the reconfiguration of the work. I mean, I think, hopefully is sort of casting, or, inviting different readings of those certain things that, might be familiar to us, but casting them in a different light somehow. But in general, I'm not really, out to sort of solve anything or answer anything. Really, it's kind of like asking questions more for me. But there's no solution.
No, I'm not looking for that, but I'm just interested in what the thinking is or what the inquiry is that drives these projects. Just what are you curious about? What are you trying to figure out? That's it. It seems like a lot of it deals with very present conditions in some way that reflects the present. I'm just interested because I'm always curious about how architects or artists, deal with the present conditions. Like, what are they seeing? What are they, and how are they manifesting what they're seeing in conceptual terms? And so, I just wondered if you had any underlying.
Not underlying, but in general, I mean, I think like I hope that that there's some kind of method which is sort of unexpectedly synthetic in some way. Is taking objects and associations and bringing them into sort of a situation where you can reread it in some way, and then sort of hopefully finding new associations that might have been sort of previously overlooked or taken for granted in the object, and that ultimately, would invite some sort of thinking, about either the history or the present of what's contained.
I'm curious about the relationship between any work between comedy and satire. Because in a lot of ways
that came up in my interview.
Okay.
Sorry. That was a good question.
No, the relationship between comedy and satire, because in a lot of ways when you say reconfiguration, I think recontextualization. Right? I think you remove something out of its context, like you rescale or resize things. Before you can close a sentence, right? It's kind of like the relationship between language and culture that you're building. I'm curious to hear about your relation to satire.
Well, the comparison between
Satire and comedy.
Between satire and comedy. Well, satire is a form of comedy, isn't it?
Sure. But I guess it intends to.
Yeah. I mean, satire is a form of commentary. It might, work indirectly. It's a way, I mean, we were talking about this earlier, that I feel like it's a way of saying something, but not quite saying it. But that there's already a slight form of degree of abstraction, because you're not just saying something as simply as you could, right? So, and satire can be critical, I think, and it could be like a form of informed commentary, like I think, in its best form. So Comedy in general, I think, is important. Somebody asked me who my favorite composer was a long time ago, and I said it was Dmitri Shostakovich. And they said, why? And I said, because his work is like super tragic and serious and funny at the same time, somehow, you know. And that's what kind of makes it incredibly sort of human to me, and it, you know, how it sort of addresses the whole sort of, you know, gamut of experience somehow. So yeah, in some of what I do, you know, like I'd like to be able to pull that off. I don't know if I do or I can, but it's sort of an ambition, you know. And that kind of simultaneity of these polarities is something that I would like to achieve, you know, in some of my projects. Just as with the simultaneity of reading between something that seems, you know, small and large at the same time, real and a representation of something, you know, I would like, you know, for that to be read that way as well. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yeah, comedy's good. Yeah.
This is sort of a surrogate question for the first year grads, because we've just spent the last couple of weeks reading Junk Space and Great Gizmo and Design by Choice and more Design and Fun, and sort of the interface between architecture and other design fields. It's like graphics in your work or product design. And you know, maybe it's a cyber connection, but there seems to be some resonance, you know, with a different target of like Neil's work. The collision of architecture and the graphics or architecture and product design. And maybe the question of O'Shea, which is you know, the life cycle of products being much quicker than the life cycle of architecture. That, you know, from the miniaturization and shrinkage makes the George Foreman grill or whatever else obsolete as a product design, but still has potential in architecture. But you know, I want to see the George Foreman grill as architecture. So you know, it goes back a little bit to Jimenez's question about the tone of the work, meaning critical satire or projective optimistic comedy. And so, you know, are these possible future architectures, even though they're on the slag heap of history of product design, like Neil's kind of nostalgia for 70s sci-fi, does the work still have legs architecturally? Because of the way that we deal with O'Shea is quite different than the way that product design does. You know, those are sheltered guys.
That's a good question. I mean, definitely the life cycles are operate at different rates, you know, between architecture and industrial design and graphics, but they all have their cultural inclinations. They are all, you know, every field sort of, you know, looked at it, you know, at a certain level really is trying to, you know, sort of portray us or interpret a certain sort of set of cultural conditions, values, obsessions, you know, at any given time. I think that, I don't know, another thing that came up in the interview earlier today was this, you know, this like idea of the eternal recurrence that I'm interested in, is that you know, we are, you know, there's no straight line into the future, that it's a circle that just keeps looping back on itself and picking up parts of its own past, collecting new things, and then moving forward. But you know, I see that in a lot of different design disciplines, and you see that in art as well. That there are a lot of eternal recurrences, and I think they're instructive, you know, in a way. It gives us a sense of relativity, you know, to know that, you know, our ideas of progress now are different, you know, than they were 20 or 30 or 80 years ago. But you know, I think that in a way we're always in the same boat, right? And you know, no idea of the new is perfect, and nothing is perfectly new, and you know, and it's important to realize that.
It seems that, I mean, every work that you showed us is very kind of carefully conceptualizing everything, the invisible, the past, the house, and the technology, the hygiene, this process. I mean, like,
I mean, did you give up on kind of special kind of experience with work on purpose? Like, I mean, everything's externalized from the observer in a way, to object relationship. So, I mean, I'm just like thinking, why or did you, I mean, purposefully like externalize all that object from, for example, like experiencing interior? I mean, I'm just thinking about this here, how to be present from the inside space matrix of an object. But which is the kind of the constraint that trying to do everything, just push everything towards an object, instead of trying to just push it towards a space matrix. In that kind of a configuration, I mean, I think because the cloud is still far away from the observer, and it's objectualizing invisible process. So, I mean, none of them would show that they seems to be like.
Are you inside something?
Yeah, or I just want to just basically reconfiguring processes to space matrix instead of object matrix. Maybe it's not.
I don't set up to make spaces. You know, I mean that's one way of
or
explaining it. You know, I mean, you know, the work involving air is, you know, on the one hand, you know, highly visual for sure. I mean, all of the work is, but at the same time, you know, working on that which we can't see, which is the space around it. And so I guess, I mean, for me, like the sort of that kind of the space between the object, what it looks like, you know, and its sort of, you know, iconographic dimensions, and what it actually does and how we engage with it is very interesting to me. But I'm working with these things, you know, and I'm not creating a different experience, like, you know, using the objects, like, you know, in a way, sort of reflecting on what it does and you know, how it has been used, or how it might be disused at this point. So, I don't know if it's hard to answer the question.
No, because I mean, from the first work, I was just like thinking about this. I mean, the slide that's not really like correct. I'm sure the experience about the air, for example, there kind of condition that you were mentioning, that all of them they were working. So that one will be experienced in a specific kind of as an experience that's very different.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know chronologically how the work has been organized.
I mean, this one works more visual. I mean, you are basically, you know, with this one, like so many people just stood there for half an hour watching this thing rotate and talking to each other about all the stuff that was in it. And, you know, and that's, you know, like, I mean, that was, you know, interesting, the kind of conversation that came from. And so it was kind of like working on like language in a way, right? It's like, you know, what is this? Or, you know, what is the syntax of this? You know, what do I recognize this as being, and what kind of memories and associations does it bring up? Okay, I think that's good. Okay.